Hello everyone, this is Sam of Historiansplaining. A historian tells you why everything you know is wrong. So earlier this month, I posted a first lecture discussing the bog bodies called Something Isn't Rotten in the State of Denmark. And that lecture examined how the bog bodies have been discovered in mires and wetlands all across Northern Europe, how they were preserved in the bogs, and what we can tell about when they lived and died, ranging all the way from the Neolithic age up to modern times. So now I've posted on Patreon for patrons only section 2 on the bog bodies called Sometimes a Garrote is Just a Garrote. And this lecture examines the question of why the bog people were killed, as so many of them clearly were, in a whole variety of brutal ways. Were these criminal murders, executions, or sacrifices? So we go through the intense, long-running debate over the most controversial of all the bog bodies, which is Lindow Man, discovered in Cheshire in England in 1984. And then we survey all the different clues that might point to the reasons why the bog people were killed, ranging from final meals to finely manicured nails, to ancient Roman writings about human sacrifices, like the infamous Wicker Man. So you'll find in the description a link to the Patreon page, and if you sign up as a patron at any level, even if it's just $1, you'll have access to all the patron-only lectures, including this one. And alternatively, there will be a link to purchase the whole playlist of Doorways in Time for a single flat upfront fee. And then you'll be able to hear this lecture on the bog bodies and also part 10 in the series, which was on Çatalhöyük, the oldest city site that's ever been discovered anywhere in the world. But now I will play just a brief excerpt from the bog bodies, section 2, Sometimes a Garrote is Just a Garrote. So several very well-preserved bog bodies were found to still have food remnants in their stomachs, from which can be reconstructed their final meals. And there are remarkable patterns here. These foods tend to be very plain, mainly porridges made from cereal grains and weedy plant seeds. They're sometimes vegetarian or sometimes flavored with small amounts of meat, fish, or dairy, but they have hardly any fruit or vegetables, and they would have been mostly bitter in taste. And this is true even in cases where it seems that the person had previously enjoyed a rich diet. They were often eaten a long time before the person died, 8 hours or more, suggesting a last meal followed then by a period of fasting before death. And this suggests a kind of ritual significance to the last meal. For instance, Toland Man had a plain porridge of barley, flax, and weedy seeds, especially knotweed, and he may also have had a little bit of fish as well. The food was cooked in a clay pot and was slightly burned. In 1954, a BBC program recreated this meal, and the archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler had to taste it, and he remarked that Toland Man probably committed suicide to escape his wife's cooking. He did not yet realize that this was pretty typical of the last meals that were served up to bog people before their deaths. Zvilu woman, for her part, had a millet-based porridge with blackberries, and that's unusual in having at least some fruit. Old Krochen Man had a simple wheat cereal with buttermilk. Huldremosa woman had coarsely ground rye and seeds of the weedy plant spurry, and some small amount of animal meat suggested by some hares. Graubala Man had a cereal gruel with a little meat indicated by bits of bone, and his gruel had more than 60 different kinds of seeds, including domestic crops, weeds, and grasses. Lindow Man had food of slightly higher quality. This was an unleavened bread or griddle cake made of ground wheat, barley, and oats, and also with bits of other plants like heather and moss from the bog. And those were probably used as fuel for the baking fire. Lindow 3 had grains and a lot of hazelnuts, which grow around Lindow moss. So, there are aspects of these last meals that suggest ritualism. The plainness and difference from the normal diet. For instance, Old Crochan Man was big and strong and lived on a protein rich diet, yet his final meal would hardly be adequate for a child. Also, the gathering of many different kinds of seeds and grains. For example, Tolland Man's food, according to scientists, showed, quote, a huge variety of environmental material. And Graubala Man's porridge had a dozen different kinds of grass seeds, suggesting an intentional ingathering of many plants from all around the environment. But both of these aspects of the Bog people's last meals are ambiguous. So the gathering of a large variety of plants could represent ritual or symbolic significance, bringing together all the different fruits of the land. But also, as curators at the British Museum pointed out in the book about Lindow Man, the wild plants in these foods are ones that commonly grow as weeds in crop fields, such as cow parsley, knotweed, chamomile, etc. And these would tend to be sifted out when the grain is threshed, and would then usually be discarded. But they might also be eaten as a low-status food, or added in to the cereal grains when food supplies are very low in times of scarcity. So you can think of it sort of like, let them eat cake, when cake refers to the crumbs that have gathered together in the bottom of an oven. These weedy seeds might be that sort of thing. So these meals could represent poor quality food being given to a condemned person facing death, a sort of prison food, or also they could indicate that the community was facing a food shortage. Hence, this would suggest that bog killings were most likely to happen during times of strain, like famines, and they may have been a way to propitiate the gods or forces of nature and so try to restore abundance. Similarly, the general bad flavor or lack of flavor. This could be symbolic, representing contempt, or it might just represent conditions of severe scarcity. For instance, the general lack of fruits. This could be intentional or could reflect that the killings happened in midwinter when foods were running low. And this ambiguity, I think, is illustrated most dramatically by a recent discovery. Namely, in 2012, maintenance workers in County Meath, Ireland, discovered Moidrum Man. So Moidrum Man's stomach was found to have hundreds of pits from sloes. And this is a small fruit that grows on a weedy, thorny bush of the rose family. And it's still gathered today in Britain and Ireland in the fall and used to infuse sloe gin. And I've actually witnessed this myself when I was in Great Britain in the autumn and I saw people out picking sloes for their gin. The sloe on its own is bitter and unpalatable, and the pits are toxic. So if Moidrum Man ate large amounts of them, it may have been as a kind of punishment, or it may have been a sort of last resort meal provided in a time of famine. We can't say for sure which, but either way, these very unusual meals, which seem to be extraordinarily poor, illustrate that these were not just random killings, happening by surprise on any ordinary day. They were special events that were anticipated, planned, and prepared for. Now, a third reason often cited for why the stomach contents of the bog bodies suggest ritualism is the presence of psychoactive materials. So as we mentioned before, Lindow Man had a little bit of mistletoe pollen in his stomach. And mistletoe is a sort of sedative. It tends to slow the heart rate. And in large amounts, it can be fatal, but in small amounts, it's relaxing. And so this might have been administered to him for ritualistic reasons as a sedative, but scientists today tend to think that it was too little to have any effect. So it's thought generally to just be accidental. But I would add once again, it also could have been present as a ritual object at the time and place of killing, even if it was not ingested. Then, as for Graubala Man from Denmark, he had some ergot in his digestive system. So this is a fungus that grows on grain crops in cool, wet conditions. It's highly poisonous if it gets into the food supply, and when ingested, it can cause burning sensations, psychosis and hallucinations, convulsions, and even death. So, what role did this ergot play in the killing of Grauballer Man? Well, one theory is that it could have been taken by accident, and the symptoms of the ergotism were seen as demonic possession, so he was ritually killed as a kind of exorcism. But ergot is highly visible on the grain. It grows in these big pods, and it's not often eaten by accident. So it might have been given to him intentionally as a drug, maybe to induce psychosis, which they saw as visions, or it might have been given in very small amounts as a kind of anesthetic. But once again, scientists today tend to say the quantity was too small to have had much effect on Grauballer Man, and it's even been estimated that the amount in his system was within what the EU today considers to be the safe range. So I don't know where the truth here is, but I would observe that perhaps the real significance of the ergot is not its supposed hallucinogenic effects or whatever, but again it reflects a time of food stress. Ergot grows at times of extreme wet weather, and it can ruin crops. So maybe this is another sign of food crisis or even famine. And maybe a lot of people in Grauballer Man's community were even eating this poisoned grain out of desperation, leading to outbreaks of ergotism. I don't know, but I do have to admit that this seems consistent with the supposition that bog killings came about as a response to times of hunger, or maybe other crises and disasters as well. And this may further help to account for the choice of targets. Large, healthy young men were the biggest eaters. That's the normal pattern. And so it would have made the most sense to jettison them in times of hunger.